Amazing. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to IBCA for getting us all together in this conversation. This is going to be an exciting topic. I'm going to try and moderate, and we'll see where we get to with the exciting personalities to my right. But before that, I was thinking today, before coming here, what is strategic autonomy? Strategic autonomy has been a defining principle of India's engagement with the world for decades. But the meaning of the term is evolving rapidly. In a world shaped by geopolitical competition, supply chain realignments, technology nationalism, and shifting economic alliances, strategic autonomy today is not just about foreign policy. It is about economic resilience, technological capabilities, and institutional strength. For India, the question is not isolation or alignment, but how to build the capacity to make independent choices while remaining deeply integrated with global markets and partners. This brings business, capital, and investors into this conversation in a very real way. Private capital, venture ecosystems, and long-term investors are increasingly central to how countries build strategic capabilities, whether in technology, energy transition, manufacturing, or digital infrastructure. With that background, very excited to have this conversation. Quickly introducing myself, my name is Nakul, Zaveri. I'm a partner at LeapFrog Investments. We are a high-growth, mid-market, emerging markets investor. We invest across healthcare, financial services, and climate. And I'm going to give my panelists a chance to introduce themselves before we jump into questions. Yash, Aanchal.
Hi, I'm Aanchal Jain. I'm the CEO of PMI Electro Mobility. PMI is an electric bus OEM, being the first OEM to make 1,000 electric buses in the country, and currently leading with more than 1,000 electric buses on ground.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yash Kela. I represent Singularity Asset Management. We're a growth equity fund across private and public equity, and strategic autonomy is one of the areas where we are very focused on. So happy to be a part of this, and thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. One of the first questions that comes to my mind is, strategic autonomy often sits in tension with globalization. In today's geopolitical environment, how should India strike the balance between remaining integrated with global markets and building domestic capability in critical sectors?
So maybe I could give our point of view on this, and I think the company Aanchal is building is a perfect example of this. So, Nakul, I think, see the framework, because I think as a country we have been practicing this for the last 10 years. I think a big successful outcome of this has been UPI, but it has been built with indigenous tech, if one would argue. Where we were really inspired by strategic autonomy is when the regulators and the policymakers felt that for a country of the size of India, and in order to increase the per capita GDP, you directionally need to create more value-added jobs, and particularly in an environment of today. So, and where we can consume, so in sectors where we are massive consumers of the likes of e-buses or defense, where we have 50,000 crores, 1 lakh crores, 2 lakh crores of consumption every year, we can build a domestic supply chain. We partner with right technology partners over a period of time, indigenize the supply chain, indigenize the tech, and be a relevant cost first leader, also good products, and be a net exporter globally. So I think in that sense, you are integrated. At the same point of time, you are solving for requirements globally. In the past, what we did with UPI, what we did with vaccines have been good examples of that. And I think that, and India is in a very sweet spot, and particularly I think as we are speaking today, unfortunate incidents are happening. So I think we can remain integrated with the world, but being a net supplier globally is our chance at this point of time to create a relevant impact. And I think the world remembers India for, the COVID vaccine that we provided. So I think that goodwill will compound over a period of time. So that's our point of view.
Thank you, Yash. Sorry, just double-clicking on this, Aanchal. You're building something in mobility, right? And in my mind, it's a critical sector. It's a foundational element for any economy that is moving towards prosperity, especially from a low-income emerging consumer class onwards. How do you think about this assessment?
So when I think of mobility, mobility is a central tenet to driving this economy forward, right? We need to transport about 45 crore people every day, be it they are going to their schools, they are going to the jobs, going, for an outing, to buy critical things and so on. So for a country as a whole, mobility is very crucial, and that mobility being designed by the country in itself is equally important. We want, Indian people manufacturing the mobility services and then running them across the country. Now, when it came to, building that mobility, India is very unique in that sense. India is a very consumer-driven economy, but it is a very price-sensitive economy as well. So when I think of strategic autonomy in the mobility sector, I think of it two ways. One is, yes, for India to be completely resilient and, to move forward in the Viksit Bharat definition, we need to have a good mobility infrastructure. And second, that mobility infrastructure needs to be built in-house in India. And that's the kind of guiding principles where PMI has, driven with, where in going to the first part, where we've tried to put in mobility across the country. Today, we have supplied buses across 33, 34 cities in the country. Surprisingly, a lot of them are tier 2 cities and tier 3 cities, which is how we internally define inclusive development. And the second is, we've had a lot of emphasis on building these electric buses that is driving mobility in-house in India. And technology and growth is a continuum. And that's where a continuous evolution has been taking place. How much localization or how much in-house Indian manufacturing we did in 2017 is a very, very different number that is from a 2024, 2026, and will be again a very, very different number from what we are hoping to achieve by 2030. But that continuous growth is what drives us and will continue to drive us, where every day we have more emphasis on, okay, how can I make this in India more? And then also solve for the India unique problem, which is where the emphasis is again to not only provide for mobility, but provide it in a manner that everybody can consume it. It can drive across the country, and that is in itself a true win. Providing mobility at a price that nobody can actually consume it is not a solution we are looking for. Providing at a price that makes sense is the solution, and that can happen only if it is being manufactured in India.
Interesting, but if you take a step back, the definition of resiliency is essentially bouncing back to the same state that you were in. So it is, in a sense, a little different from growing, because in growing, you're moving from milestone 1 to milestone 2. And at the same time, resiliency does not, or rather comes at a cost. And therefore, building business models where unit economics are critical. How relevant resiliency is in your business model, and how do you think about it at a macro level? Because there will be cost to building supply chain diversity, there will be cost to building optionality in businesses, and again, going to strategic autonomy, it does not come without a cost. How do you think about it?
So, Nakul, if I may, I'll take an example. So, let's take the solar OEM sector, right? And you take the integrated stack. That sector existed from 1986. I think till 2018, 2020, the biggest strength would be to survive. And can you, I think, not die for a period of time, because a lot of industries died in that time frame. There are times when I think companies which are the leaders in the sector were going to be bought for 200-300 crores by another leader in that sector, which had played out. Like a wind company was in the process of buying maybe a solar company. And if I take an example, like 2020, the entire sector EBITDA will be like 300 crores, which would be north of like 15, 16,000 crores at this point of time. So, like, how did a company, like if you take an example of Zaveri, if you take an example of Premier, Vikram, and because we are talking of a framework and not a specific company, and one may perform better, one may perform on an average. So, we leveraged our own demand, put incentives for better localization. So someone who is doing 60% plus localization and, you know, taking that pain, I think was the benefits of the incentives that were provided. Using that, we started exports. That gave enough profit pools outside of equity capital to ensure that you can build your distribution in other channels. In the present landscape, you know, America put tariff barriers on India. I think the industry which had maybe 50, 60% exposure to America, either those people created their factories over there, or they turned towards the domestic market. And in that time frame, they created retail distribution. And now they are diversifying themselves outside that one product line into transmission, into other categories. And I think, let's say, for a company like Zaveri, it generates 6,000 crores of EBITDA right now. And in 2021, the market cap was lesser than that. So I think that resilience was built in because they survived for, you know, 25 years before that tipping point came across. And maybe I think Aanchal is better to talk about e-buses, but e-buses tipping point is coming now. Cumulatively in 13 years, the industry would have sold 11,000 buses. Now, hopefully, they would sell that every year. So I think surviving, building that incremental things, that processes, that cost structures, that people, I think gets you ready till the point that headwind converts into tailwind and then you play out. And particularly in the present scheme of things, I think how, you know, I think people were thanking the regulators and definitely that awareness that India needs to have its own technology. There are funds like RDI which are put in place and which will mobilize, I think, very relevant sums of money. You know, had domestic capital not been there, the last 3, 4 years or 5 years for the domestic industry would be very, very tough. So, and at those points of time, and I think for those reasons, I think we have to keep on building on this strategic autonomy.
Got it. This brings me to a very interesting question. One of my favorite frameworks is what I call intergenerational value migration. And this is happening in many sectors, in many industries, in many markets. But value migration does not happen in silos. In our markets, governments are, in a sense, responsible for at least initiating or starting some of these points. And when you think about governments playing a catalytic role in shaping new sectors through policy signals or incentives, particularly in market creation. In India, we have seen this across climate, energy infrastructure, manufacturing. In your experience, Aanchal, do you think government has played a vital role in building the foundational ecosystem for e-buses to move to the next level?
Yes, Nakul, I am a very strong believer in governments, A. B, that without the government support, electric buses in India would have not taken off. You know, the electric bus ecosystem that we see in the country today is a pure outcome of government policy. They tried solving it and are still solving it at every level. So let's start with the electric buses that, the first round of electric buses that came in the country were priced at, you know, approximately 1.5 to 2 CR. In reference, your diesel bus was 30 lakhs. If an STU was used to buying 30 lakh buses of 100 buses of 30 lakhs, which is, you know, 30 crore investment, how would have they done a 200 crore investment? They could have not. So they tried solving it through GCC concessions. Then they said, okay, where will these buses charge? How will the electricity come in? That is how they solved for it by giving guaranteed electricity and depot and parking spaces. Then they said banks will never finance these because of, you know, variation in how much the bus could run. Therefore, they gave it minimum guarantee kilometers to make it bankable. Then that was the first set of solutions they came up with to get the market going, to get the demand created. Then when the initial take-up happened and, electric buses started becoming popular, then they came through the second set of solutions, that is the time they felt right to, okay, how do we attract investments and investors at this point in time? How can we design the electric bus segment more like how we've done it in solars and, other renewable spaces? So then they started giving payment security mechanism, which was a big push. Again, I'm sure you guys know more about the SECI timeline. In SECI, payment security came after a long, long time. In electric buses, it's come in a matter of, 5-6 years. So then they set up this whole payment security mechanism, which allowed that small confidence that was lacking by the investors being a B2G segment and opening it, realizing it's such a capital intensive business, OEMs who had been running as operators couldn't sustain it for so long. So that is where the second demand of push also came. Then another point which was so critical was, again, mobility and mobility being affordable is crucial to the country. To make the affordability, they did come in with initial subsidies. Then they came in with demand aggregation to phase out the subsidies because it can be a start but not the end to the means. So the demand aggregation was again taken it by the center government so that me as an OEM had an order book of about 3,000, 5,000 buses and I could make those investments to do localizations. Then they also gave incentives to do localization. So if you look at the end-to-end of this whole value chain that's been going about and how that success took place, is purely at a government initiative. I would take some credit. We as OEMs at PMI have also worked very hard in doing all of this, but that support was always there. And even today, we have very frequent conversations which are, okay, what are the challenges this sector is facing and how we can solve it, how we can solve it soon, are most of the conversations structured around.
It's fascinating to know how, from a real world case study, this to happen, and therefore governments now categorically understand when to come in and when to go out. This is pretty much important.
Nakul, that is very important because the investing thesis cannot just be incentives. And I think for all investors over here, one natural question be you have a single party customer risk, which is like various government schemes. So what happens when that goes away? And I think that is the next phase of build for hopefully a sector like this will look like. Like they will solve for more customer pools, more product portfolio, export it. I think now, like an American company would have an export framework also, right? That you start going into these Western European countries, South Asian countries, and this is how the framework will look like. In India also, that is how it will happen now. Like, defense exports or UPI is in like 92 countries. So, that is possibly the next phase of growth will look like. And when, cash flow lumpiness goes away and you're well distributed.
Got it. We've got 5 minutes, so last question. Strategic autonomy doesn't happen in a silo, right? You need some significant event, mega trends, structural advancements to take place. Looking forward to the next decade, right? Where do you see India's biggest structural advantages emerging across strategic sectors, whether through domestic demand, engineering talent, manufacturing capabilities, or new business models? For me particularly, I think the mega trend of electrification is a very, very large structural movement that is happening, particularly when we are talking about strategic autonomy in recent cases. It's got its pros and cons, it's got a time issue, it's got an infrastructure issue, but do you think differently, or do you think there are certain other areas that are more critical and relevant?
So, Nakul, I feel that all the things that you said have to come together and, of course, have to be executed over a period of time. I don't think that you can fast track this. So, like the framework for this would look like, and in that sense, as you said, that the government needs to know when to come in and when to go out, right? So, if I basket it in 3 areas and put this framework, right? The framework being, you have huge demand pools in India, leverage localization, you will take time to develop technology. Technology from TRL 1 to 3 to 7, 8, 9 will take time. maybe years to go. So while I think you're solving that, do a technology partnership, work on localization, solve for demand. Generally, I think people start with 10, 13% margin pools, keep on expanding those margin pools, diversify your cash flows. We would basket it in largely 3 areas. One is what you call energy transition. So like you will have a combination of OEM plays, etc., coming over there. Possibly, I think battery is one very interesting theme. There's a certain argument that what solar led, I think battery is something that will follow because of like various problem statements that it has to solve from a grid stability, storage, etc. perspective. And again, this framework being applicable because hopefully we'll have 250 gigawatt of demand ourselves. The second is materials because I think that becomes very, very important, right? So your critical minerals, which the government of India has classified in 30 categories. And you know, both the public sector, the government, like Ministry of Mines is leading it in a very, very interesting way where they're doing a collaboration between 30 countries and saying that how do we solve for it so that we ensure as a country we have access to it. We have failed, we have had critical points of failure. For example, I think permanent magnets was one, and I think at this point of time we have various schemes that we are trying to solve for that. And the third being advanced manufacturing. So sectors like medical devices, etc. Like pharma is a 1 lakh crore profit pool for India as a country. It was like 2,000 crores 20 years back. So sectors like medical devices, aero components, like for Airbus, Boeing, 5% of the supply chain would come from India, and India will be the fourth largest supplier for them. So as we keep on expanding on that manufacturing, but where we have a critical base already, like it's not that आप 300 supplier को आज बनाने जा रहे हो, and hopefully this will keep on, you know, it will be a virtuous cycle where one cycle supports the other. So I think those are things to look out for.
I was going to just tie all of this in the example of electric buses, right? The current per capita of buses in India is 1.2 bus per 1,000 people. The international standard is about 6 to 8. So clearly in the next 5-6 years, there's a demand of about 10-12 lakh buses. I would imagine we would supply about 2 lakh electric buses and so on. So, you know, and I always remember this conversation. One American customer came to me and he said like, okay, I'll give you an order site that will be life-changing for you and you would not believe the size. And I said, okay, how many buses? He said 100. Can you imagine 100 buses? I said, my smallest order book from a city is actually 600 from a tier 2 city in India. So in this sector, the demand is amazing. And it is, you know, while the exports are good from a margin perspective, but internal demand is very high. So, you know, you have the demand problem solved for. Then there is the manufacturing. The manufacturing is going to be continuous improvements in technology. So there will be an R&D portion to it. There'll be the manufacturing portion. We, you know, I always say as the best Rolexes are handmade, best buses are handmade also. So there's a huge employment opportunity that we are creating in the manufacturing segment. Within manufacturing of buses, you will have the allied auto components like the batteries, the motors. There'll be the localizations of the batteries, which we are already doing, or the motors, which again we are doing, but at a greater technology improvement every year on year. Then there is the operation of these buses. So even if we are looking at operating 10,000 buses, we are looking at employing 26,000 to 30,000 people. So there's a lot of employment generation happening there. Then there'll be the training of those drivers and the conductors and the maintenance manpowers and so on. So there's again an employment generation there. So end to end for me, this is strategic autonomy where I am creating a demand. I am trying to build up manufacturing for solving that demand, and plus I'm creating all of this employment to, you know, for both manufacturing operations and so on. So you are, and then these are the people who will again ride those buses. So that is how life will come as a full circle.
Thank you, Aanchal. This has been a fascinating discussion. I think we'll see many more discussions around strategic autonomy across this year. It hasn't been more timely than ever. We are in a real-world situation. Aanchal, thank you very much. Yash, thank you.
Thank you, Nakul.
Thank you, Nakul. Thank you to the audience.